Hello, welcome to Now Tell Us. At Now Tell Us, we have guests come and tell us stories. They come and inspire us, they come and educate us on a subject. And always we're having great guests like today. Today we have a great guest. His name is Ronald Kimmons, and he's going to tell us about writing a novel. And I want to thank you, each and every one of you who's watching, those who get to watch even after we are through the recorded version. We thank you for taking your time. And we ask you to please send us a comment, ask us a question, and we'll be glad to reply to you. Remember to subscribe to our channel or follow us on whatever platform that you are watching us on. And let's keep growing. Let's keep encouraging one another. Let's keep on getting new ideas as our guests come and bring them to us. And now, without taking one more minute, I'm going to go together with you and meet Ronald. Here we go. Hi, Ronald.
Hello, Anthony.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, how are you doing?
I am fabulous. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. I'm fabulous too. And Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year, 2023.
Yes, we are in a new year with new things, new beginnings, and what a wonderful time to
Yeah.
be on this show. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to be doing my first show in 2023 with a dreamer, a philosopher, and a creator. This is
Yeah.
wonderful. And can we please know where are you?
So I live in Arizona, in
Okay.
the Phoenix area. Yeah. I'm originally I'm from Texas, from Houston, but now we live in Arizona, and it's a good place. A lot of nice people here.
What's the weather like? I mean, is it
It's
hot?
been raining,
Oh,
which is not a normal thing for Arizona.
ah,
But yeah, right now it's actually quite cool and wet, which is not what we normally get here. But it's good.
yeah, that's good. Good to hear that. And I know you're many things. Being a dreamer, I like to interact with the dreamers because someone told me it's the dreamers that change the world. Another one said that dreamers move the world around. So thank you for being on our show.
Thanks.
Yeah. Added that to a philosopher, maybe you can give us better quotes on that at some point.
I well, I'm ever since I was little. Like you ask my mother, she'd tell you that I've had a tendency to have my head in the clouds. I don't know how many times she told me that when I was a kid. It's like, well, you always have your head in the clouds, and that's the honest truth. I've always been like that.
Hmm.
Um, I tend to have trouble focusing on one thing, and just kind of my mind kind of goes all over the place, which can be good and can be bad. It often keeps me from accomplishing things, but it's the source of a lot of interesting ideas.
Wow. And how was it when you were growing up? Wow, the experiences some stories you'd like to share with us that is interesting for this
Well, just
episode.
when I was a kid, we lived in a rural place, and we moved from when I was really little. When I was really little, we lived in the suburbs around Houston. Then we moved to a rural place, and this is pretty rural. I mean, it had we lived on a dirt road. We had about 20 acres of land, and and that included uh, woods, and we actually had a ravine that went through our land, and we would play outside a lot, and go down in the ravine, and build tree forts in the big oak trees. It's very conducive to to little kids with imaginations, being able to go out and just kind of wander around and imagine all sorts of things, of monsters in the woods and battles between heroes and evil wizards and all sorts of things like that. It was just very it was a very the environment was very conducive, I think, to imagination,
Hmm.
and that's definitely something was uh, that I was in heavily influenced by when I was a kid. Coming and going outside into the woods and playing in the trees, playing in the ravine, and make little weapons out of sticks and stuff like that, and take things from movies that I watched, um, books that I read, and and really apply them to my play. And of course, I have four brothers and four sisters, so we I had other kids to play with. We had some neighbors too, and we play with some, but there weren't a whole lot of kids within walking distance. So it was largely my siblings that we'd play with, and a few other kids sometimes. Um, but um, but yeah, it was definitely something that I feel fostered creativity, because in order to keep myself occupied, I had to be creative. I had to be imaginative,
Hmm.
um, and 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 yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. And what did you grow up to be? What has been your career so far?
So when I went to college, I did a double major in English and Chinese, and I worked in translation for a while, and I also wrote, as a freelance writer, wrote a lot of website content and marketing content and things like that. Now, my wife and I started a marketing agency, and so I went from translation industry to having my own marketing agency, and we built that, and we still have that, and my wife is kind of taking that over at this point, and letting me work on really focus on my novels, on my writing,
Wow.
and that's so it's a real exciting time right now.
Wow. Yeah, we'll go there into the novels. But before we go there, there's something that I had seen on your YouTube channel, and I was kind of, whoa, this is interesting. I discovered you can sing. And not only sing, I discovered that you're singing in different languages. You speak in English, you speak in Portuguese, Spanish, Mandarin, Indonesian, Voleric. How is that?
Yeah. So the Voleric is a language made up for my books. Like that's actually from my novel.
Okay.
So it's not a real language, but
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
yeah, it's a but I mean I really created it. I mean the words actually it is real in the sense that the words correlate to real words and everything. But yeah, well, my wife is Brazilian, and she also lived in Chile for a while, so she speaks Spanish and Portuguese. And I was, like I said, I studied Chinese in college, and I was also a missionary in Taiwan for 2 years, and so I'm fluent in Mandarin. And I just kind of learned. I learned, being in the translation industry, I was exposed to a lot of languages and stuff, and I decided to learn another Asian language, and that was Indonesian. And I just kind of learned Indonesian by reading books, and it's as Asian languages go, Indonesian is one of the easier ones to learn. But yeah, I learned Indonesian that way, and I can converse decently in Indonesian. Not really well, but basic stuff I can do. And like I said, I'm fluent in Mandarin, and I'm pretty close to fluent in Spanish. I know fluency is kind of a vague concept. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean by fluent? I can definitely we went to Puerto Rico recently, and I can you know if I run across people and who speak Spanish, and there's something that I need or want to know or something, I can talk to them just fine. And so I speak Spanish pretty well, not as well as I speak Mandarin, but pretty well.
Wow. With all those with all those languages, I suspect you can also speak some Swahili.
No Swahili yet. No Swahili yet.
I speak
That would be
Swahili.
cool.
I come from East Africa,
Yeah,
Kenya to be specific.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
as you know, being someone in the translation industry, like I know what Swahili is and how it's meaningful in Africa. You know, as a lingua franca
Hmm.
between people who speak different languages and everything. But yeah, I haven't studied it yet.
Yeah, but you speak some, and let me prove to you that you speak some, and you start telling people that you speak Swahili. Do you know Hakuna Matata?
I do know Hakuna Matata. Yes,
What
also
does
know
that mean?
Ubuntu.
Huh? Hakuna Matata. That means there is no problem. No problem.
Yeah,
No worries.
yeah.
Now, your novels. When did you start writing? I mean, you told us that you wrote some website content. How did all that weave into you becoming a writer of novels? And you
Um,
told us
well,
about
since I was little, I
Diana.
wanted
Yeah.
to be a novelist. You know,
Mhm.
and I wrote stories. Like when I was in elementary school, I actually I won little contests in my school writing stories,
Mhm.
and been writing um, I've been writing um, stories, short stories mostly for ever since, right? I've like while I was working as a translator, as a content writer, and also in doing other things, I have been writing a lot of short stories because that's not a huge commitment.
Mhm.
I'll just get an idea and I'll go and I'll write it out in an hour or two. Um, but I hadn't written a novel until recently, and that was when I started earlier this year,
Mhm.
or
Wonderful.
sorry, earlier last year.
Oh yeah,
It's now
that's.
2023.
I wondered how early you started. Was it? Anyway, so you've published it yet, or is about to be
It's
published?
not. It's hasn't been released yet. It's coming out in the end of this month. I have I have released a novella, it's which is shorter, and that comes out. Sorry, that has already come out, and that's already available on my website. And
Mhm.
it's the novella is a prequel to my novel. It comes before my novel, um, and the story behind that is like I was writing the novel, and I have a character in there who is an investigator, is a private investigator, and I mentioned how he helped to find a serial killer who is nicknamed the Wolfman, and and I took that and I said, well, that would be an interesting story. I want to tell that story, how he helped to find the Wolfman. So I actually went back and wrote the novella about that, about how he went and found the Wolfman. And that's what the novella is about. So even though I wrote it after I wrote the novel, but it comes before, and
Mhm.
it's already been released, and it gives you a good taste of my writing and of the story that's going to be the bigger story that's going to be told in the novel.
Hmm. Now, we could be having some audience who don't know the difference between a novel and a novella. Would you be kind enough to give us an insight into that?
It's just a novella is shorter, um, and a novella you should be able to read just in if you sit down and just read it, you should read in like maybe like 2 or 3 hours.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas of course a novel tends to take longer than that. But yeah, that's just it. It's just this, it's longer than a short story, but shorter than a novel.
Mm. Now, how was the process of you putting up and putting together a novel? How was it challenging? Did you and and
So
and, and how did you eventually? How I mean, how are you publishing it? If we may
so
know.
yeah, good question. So uh, there are the terminology among writers is there's plotting and then there's pantsing. Plotting being like if I go and I carefully plan out the whole novel beforehand, and I do a very thorough um, framework and plan for it. Of course, pantsing would be just like I have an idea and just sit down and start writing, you
Hmm.
know. And these are two different approaches. They're both valid, and I um, the first in this novel in Wild River, I actually did mostly it's plotting. I plotted it out really well.
Okay.
I went and did a full layout. I went chapter by chapter, giving a synopsis of every chapter that hadn't been written yet, and and did that, and then I went from there. So it wasn't, uh, and I knew where I was going when I began. Right,
Mm-hmm.
I knew what I wanted to get to. Now, of course, as I wrote it, I still ended up coming up with ideas as I went, and the framework, the plan changed a little bit as I went along, but still, I had a pretty clear idea of what I was doing when I started.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have during in the month of November, I participated in NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, where you're supposed to crank out a novel over the course of a month. And at that point, I had finished my novel Wild River, but I'm just still doing and up till now, I'm still doing edits of it. But I decided to go ahead and work on the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
So in the month of November, I started writing the novel that comes after, which is called The Still Army, and I did that. I pantsed that. I didn't plot it.
Okay.
I just sat down and just started writing,
Yeah.
and I ended up writing about 40,000 words over the course of a month, and that was an interesting learning experience. It's probably gonna. I'm not anywhere near finishing the second novel in the series,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a great exercise, and it helped me in that it's going to help me put the finishing touches on the first novel because it helps me to more clearly see what I want to do in the second novel, so I know how better to connect to that.
Yeah. And the reason of asking you that is because we have viewers or listeners who are interested also in putting together a novel. So
Right.
if you share your experience with them, then they could be inspired to start writing or maybe finish
Yeah,
something
and
already
I mean,
started.
you just so much about writing is just sitting down and writing, just sitting down and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and I interact with a lot of writers. You know, like I'm a lot of on a lot of online communities of writers and things. And something that I see people talk about a lot is writer's block. They talk about how they have these general ideas of what they want to write, but then writer's block just crushes them, and they're not able
Mm-hmm.
to get it done. And that's for me, that's not really ever been an issue. I don't I don't really deal with what with writer's block because like I do reach points where like I'm in a particular scene and I'm not sure what I want to do. Like I have a specific thing I want to happen and I don't know how to make it happen very well. Um, but when something like that happens, I just go and I write about something else.
Mm-hmm.
I just go, I like, okay, well, I skip this. I say something happens here. I don't know what, and I skip the next part and I just keep writing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm always able to write something. So I don't really have writer's block in the sense that I can't write anything. I'm sometimes I kind of reach a limit in a specific scene or a specific story, but I can always write something. And the more I write, the more I'm able to write.
Mm-hmm.
So if I just skip over that part that got difficult and just keep writing something else, usually I can go back later
Mm-hmm.
after I've been writing other stuff. I can go back and say, oh yeah, I know what I need to do here and do that. So writer's block never really is a thing for me because I do that. And I know that like I'm a fan of Brandon Sanderson and he's a big fantasy writer and he said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that because he writes so much. He publishes so many books. It's ridiculous. But he says that yeah, he doesn't really have writer's block because if he starts having trouble, he just with one book he just goes and starts writing another book, and then he'll come back to the first book later on. You know, so he's always producing stuff because writer's block doesn't really stop him.
That's interesting to learn. And now we are interested to know what's your publishing plan. What with how are you planning to publish? How are you publishing it?
Yeah, so I'm just self-publishing. I'm doing completely independent. I'm not really interested in working with publishers, you know, because I'm look where I'm coming from. I'm coming from having my own marketing agency, right? Now it wasn't the what we do as a marketing agency is not publishing. You're not publishing novels, you know. So there's a lot here that I'm learning that's new for me.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a lot of knowledge of marketing, right? And that's the main thing that publishers provide is marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just don't see the need for me to go to a publisher for that. And especially considering the fact that when when writers go to publishers, they have to submit and submit and submit. You hear the writers with novels that they want to publish, and literally have to make hundreds of submissions before it finally gets accepted by a publisher. And I see stories like that, and I just think, why put myself through that? Why not just take that effort and just apply it to my own marketing, right? And in this age that we're in, we have so many resources, so many tools out there for us. The internet is such a democratizing force. Why should I try to go the old school route and go through a publisher? If a publisher came to me and offered me this really lucrative deal right now, I would probably take it. But none of them are going to do that, right? If I wanted to go through an old school publisher, I'd have to make lots of submissions. They would probably also want me to make significant changes to my work that I may or may not like. And in the end, even if they do pick me up, a lot of the time, publishers, like, they'll pick up a book, but then they won't really focus on it and they won't really invest in it. And so they don't really market it. And in the end, it doesn't do very well. Most books published through traditional publishers don't do well. They hardly sell anything. So I see all that, and I think, why take that route? Like, for me as a new novelist, an independent novelist, it just doesn't make sense. Now, years from now, if I've established myself and I have a big following and I have a lot of success, and I am coming from a position of strength, if a publisher comes to me and wants to work with me, I will consider it. Then I'm negotiating from a position of strength. So maybe I will do it then, but right now I just don't see any reason to bother with it.
Okay. Now, going into content, you're writing fantasy.
Right, I'm writing fantasy.
Yes, and I also realized that you're a Christian.
Yeah.
How do you get to go around the two?
Oh, yeah, and I understand what you're asking. I know that for a lot of Christians, fantasy is this scary thing, right? Like, I remember when Harry Potter was coming into the mainstream and getting famous, a lot of Christians getting very angry, very loud about it, saying, no, we shouldn't be teaching kids all this stuff about magic and everything. But I think it's very important for people, kids in particular, to learn first to differentiate between fantasy and reality, and also to be able to differentiate between their imagination and their religious beliefs. If you have trouble distinguishing between imagination and religious belief, then I think something is wrong there. And what is wrong is not the fact that people have imaginary things that they talk about. The problem is that you need to reconsider how you view your religion. For me, when I approach fantasy stories, I'm always going to be, whether I'm reading or writing, it's going to be dealing with things that I don't believe exist. But that's okay. It's fun, right? I don't read Lord of the Rings and start believing in elves. It's not a thing. It's not a real threat to me at all. And so when people say, like, oh, you shouldn't read Harry Potter. By the way, I've never read Harry Potter, but anyway, people say you shouldn't read Harry Potter because you start believing in magic and witchcraft and all this stuff. And first off, like, the way magic is portrayed in Harry Potter is very different from the supposedly real magic that people practice in the world today. People who are serious about magic, that's nothing like what they actually do. So this thing in Harry Potter that's being portrayed doesn't really have a real correlation to the real world anyway. And also, it's whether we're talking about fantasy or even in nonfiction, I think it can be very useful to entertain possibilities, hypothetical situations that you don't believe to be real, but that gives you a framework to discuss and consider ideas in a way that can be beneficial.
Mm,
It's often very useful to consider hypothetical scenarios that could never actually happen,
mm-hmm,
but that because that allows you to view reality from a new perspective. And I
mm,
think that applies to fantasy even more than for other types of writing.
mm. Now, as we know that writers are readers, and I want to guess that you read quite much. Now,
Mhm.
which books, which authors have you been reading recently?
So um, I actually have two books here right now that I've been reading. So the funny thing is that even though I'm a fantasy writer, I haven't read a whole lot of fantasy in my life.
Mm,
I've read Tolkien and and I've read a number of fantasy books, but I mostly read more. I think this has largely has to do with the fact that I studied English in college, but I'm kind of a bit of a snob. I like the classics. I like my one of my favorite writers is Dostoevsky. I love Dostoevsky,
mm-hmm,
um, but because I'm a fantasy writer, I realized I should probably read some more fantasy. So recently I started reading a little more fantasy. I have this book right here that I just read from Robin Hobbs called Assassin's Apprentice,
mm-hmm,
and it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's great. I actually did a review of it on my YouTube channel. But yeah, great book. It's it's kind of slow because she does a lot of character development.
mm-hmm,
She You see this character developing from when he is a child, from a small child. You see his earliest memories, right? Um, and uh, and goes through adolescence to becoming a young adult. But it's a great book. The prose is phenomenal. The characters are very believable. She understands the way medieval courts worked.
mm-hmm,
A lot of the things that went on in medieval courts, medieval castles, and stuff. And so and I love that aspect of it. It's a story that feels very real, even though it's a fantasy story that has fantastic elements like magic and things. So yeah, that's one thing I've been reading recently. Also, I it's holding up my microphone actually right now, but we got this guy right here. I had never read Lovecraft before. Lovecraft is kind of a big name in fantasy horror, and people talk about Lovecraft a lot, and people reference Lovecraft a lot. But I had never read any Lovecraft, so I actually just started reading Lovecraft just about a week ago. But it's definitely it's an interesting experience. I can see why people like him, why people think he's fun, and it's kind of like reading Shakespeare in the sense that you read it and it seems very cliche. You're like, oh, I've read this before. I've read stuff like this before. I've seen stuff like this before. But you realize it started with him.
mm-hmm,
He's the one that originated this whole type of writing, this whole subgenre, And
mm-hmm,
so it's not really cliche because he started it, right? And uh, and and other people mimicked him, and that's why it feels cliche because so many other people have done it.
mm. So, what's your writing style?
My writing style. So
So, if
I
it's yeah, okay.
I tend to not do a whole lot of exposition.
Mm-hmm,
Um, I know fantasy writers, when as, as as fantasy writers, we have to build whole worlds, right? There's a lot of world building that goes into what we do, and that
mm-hmm,
brings with it a certain temptation when you start a book to just kind of go in the first chapter and start giving the whole history of the world
mm-hmm,
from the very in the first chapter. And so you start the first chapter, you're not even talking about the characters, just going on and on about the world, and that's a big temptation, I know. I don't really do that. um I don't do much exposition at all.
mm-hmm,
I just go with the story. I get into action, and I do have a lot of dialogue, and I don't really do a whole lot of my work is not very psychological in the sense that I don't go into someone's mind and tell you what they're thinking so
okay.
much. I do it some, but I don't really dwell on that. I try to show it in what they do, right?
Mm-hmm,
Um, And yeah, so I guess that's a good description of my writing style. It's pretty fast paced, and I think that one of the drawbacks of that is that sometimes it lacks a little clarity, because people read my work and they see things happening and they don't necessarily understand why a character is acting a certain way because I haven't told them specifically what's going on in this character's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it also, but I feel that it feels a lot more visceral and real
Mm-hmm.
when you're reading it. You don't just know what's going on; you feel what's going on because you're being given the action. You're being shown their feelings, right, and
Okay.
not just what is causing their feelings.
Mm. Oh, wonderful. So, in a summary, like 2 words, and tell us what we are going to find in a novella that you are asking people to go and download from your website, and then we will send them to your website to go and
Yeah,
download.
so novella, like I said, it's this the main character. His name is Bandas Riverman, and this fantasy world. It's kind of based on it's a different world, but it's based on 1860s America, like right after the American Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the main character, Bandas Riverman, he was born and raised a slave. Um, but this war happened. They called it the Slave War, and it resulted in the end of slavery. And he's a bit of a, even though he was raised a slave and not technically, it wasn't legal for him to learn to read and everything. He's kind of a genius, and he taught himself to read, and he's just a very intelligent guy, and he became an a private investigator, and you see him taking on one of his first big cases where he is hired by a local tycoon to go and find this serial killer called the Wolfman,
Yeah,
who is
the one that
who
you is the one that you summarized before.
yeah, and so he goes and
It's
he
reminding the person what they are going to find. Yeah.
yeah he's going to go after the Wolfman, and he has to use some of his own special abilities to find the Wolfman, but his use of these special abilities bring a certain danger for him that you see in the story.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a little bit of a thriller, a little bit of a supernatural thriller, and kind of I think you would classify it as steampunk because of the era. But yeah, and that gives you a background of Bandas Riverman, and that is the main character also of my novel that is coming out later this month.
So where will they find it if they want to go and read it?
My my website is ronaldmkimmons.com. ronaldmkimmons.com. And if
Mm-hmm.
you go there, there's a button right at the top of the page that says download the free novella, and you can go there and get the free novella today.
Okay, so that's www.ronaldmkimmons.com. Go
Mm-hmm.
there and download the novella and know how Ronald writes. Get the story of the Wolfman. I believe
Den
it's
it's
an
called it's
interesting
called
one.
Den of the Wolfman. Den of
Den
the
of the
Wolfman.
Wolfman. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's about it. We really appreciate you taking your time. I believe there's someone out there who's been inspired to go and write, and or even go and read your book first and then write. And we thank you for that, for everything that you've shared.
And thanks for having me on, Anthony.
Hmm. And now it's just about time that we are signing off. But before we go, we ask you to leave us with a few words that we should always remember. What are they?
So there's something that I actually put in my in my novel,
Hmm.
that one of the characters wrote. I can't remember word for word, but she says discipline is everything. Don't think that discipline robs you of freedom. Discipline gives you the freedom to do difficult things, whereas ineptitude turns every situation into a prison. And then
Mm.
she says, the taut string plays the music.
Mm. That's a good one for the beginning of the year. Uh, we
So
should
keep
be.
going to the gym.
Yes, let's keep going to the gym. Let's keep
Yeah.
on. doing the necessary things despite them being hard, despite us facing some challenges. Let's be disciplined in what we got to do to achieve what we have to. And always quote Ronald Kimmons. He's the one who said that. Yeah, so thank you, our viewers, our listeners. We really thank you for taking your time once again. And once again, we thank Ronald as we are signing off. And I've been your host, Anthony Morore. Together with Ronald Kimmons, we are saying bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.